To welcome everyone who joined us here. This is Oля Tamanova and Media Center in Ukrinform. We start our work, the 9th year of war, and this is the 208th day since the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressors to our land. And I would like to thank all the representatives of the media for covering this war, for telling the truth about the war and the heroic resistance of the Ukrainian people. Today our team would offer you at 12 p.m. Vasyl Furmal will join us here, Deputy Chair of the Council of the National Bank of Ukraine. Will talk about the stabilization of the foreign exchange market, hryvnia exchange rate, and work of the banking system in general. And right now I would like to present to you Taras Vysotskyi, First Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. So let's start this discussion by focusing on the results of the harvesting season. Thank you. Welcome, esteemed participants of the press conference. Since this year is broken down into two seasons, we have the seeding season of winter and summer crops and harvesting of winter and summer crops. So from the standpoint of seeding and harvesting, we're in between of those two seasons, and thus we can make some interim results. Well, it's already clear that our heroic agrarians, farmers, with the help of the armed forces of Ukraine and the occupation of a large territory of Ukraine back in spring, managed to use the opportunities of this year to plant, and the planting season covered 80% compared to previous year, even though at the beginning of the invasion the risk was that the planting will happen only in 15 or 60%. The occupation of Kyiv, Sumy and Chernihiv regions helped to this, and this will also be helped in terms of winter crops when the Kharkiv region is liberated. So 80% of arable lands have been planted, a good indication for the time of war. And we can also talk about the first results, because the early group of crops have been harvested already. All in all, I would like to say that we expect this year the harvests of crops at the level of 67 million tons. Well, that's not a record. The record was last year, but still, I would like to say that this would be one of the top 5 indicators for 30 years. So when the war is on, well, our farmers managed to harvest out of 67 million, 50 to 52 tons cereals and beans, and 15 to 17 million oil products. On the first block of the early group, the harvesting season is over. Like wheat, about 19 million tons, with the average level of more than 40 centners per hectare. So wheat being a critical foodstuff for food security of Ukraine, our internal consumption, domestic consumption of is about 7 to 8 million tons a year. So we have collected already twice as much as we need. It's already in the silos, so there would be no threat of running out of wheat. Barley, 5.5 million tons. That's mostly for cattle feeding. Domestic consumption for people is 3 to 3.5 million. So we had harvested more than we need actually this year. And another crop that is people are always talking about is buckwheat. So about 60,000 tons have been harvested, and that's 1/3, 35 to 40% of the planted area. So what could it suggest to us? the harvesting would be 140, probably even 150,000 tons, while the domestic consumption 100 to 110,000 because of migration and the reduction of consumption. So for the last 10 years, we managed to produce 1.5 times more than domestic consumption, so having the reserves left, because previous years 35 to 40% have been imported. So here the agrarians substantially increase the arable area covered by buckwheat. Now, such winter crop as beetroot, 3.1 million tons. Again, that's at the level of last year, which is a good indicator indeed. Corn, sunflower and soya, we only started harvesting those three crops, collecting 5 to 10% of the total, so it's too early to say about what would be the grand total at the end, but currently the harvest results are quite good, the yield is quite good, and we expect that we'll get nice results for them. Probably late November, early December we will have final results, because this year vegetation started 2 or 3 weeks than in classical calendar year. So that was rape actually, not beetroots, but with beetroots 3.5% have been harvested. That's the yield is more than 500 hectares centers per hectare, so we'll have 1.1, probably even 1.2 million tons of sugar, when the internal consumption is about 1,150,000. Well, we'll have to look at the migration figures, so actually Ukrainians will have their sugar needs totally covered. We have 2 seasons, planting and then harvesting. So we have already started planting the winter crops. We have 3 major winter crops actually, wheat and barley and rape seeds. Well, rape seeds we start planting earlier, starting from August actually. So 90% as of today of the forecasted areas have been planted by it, 480,000 hectares total. So that's the end of the planting season for them. Wheat and barley, we have only started planting, and we have planted no more than 5%, by the way, rye as well. So we see that the weather had some intensive rainy weather, which will foster good vegetation. So we expect that we'll have great results in terms of the yield of winter crops. The areas forecasted for that are enough to form the food reserves for next year. We, looking at the figures of this year, see that the consumption is 2.5 times more. For corn, we will have the production 3 times more than the domestic consumption. So what does it tell us? That we have the potential for exports. Well, once again, we form substantial potential for exports. This year, as of July 1st, that's the beginning of the marketing year, we had about 20 million tons of crossover volumes, and the topic of exportation would remain quite relevant in order to sell the harvested crops. When we launched the seeds initiative, the figures started increasing quite substantially, and if you model, well, July 3 million tons, that was before the grain initiative. In August, that was 4.5 million tons with grain initiative a month, and now we can see that we can reach, looking at the figures, with the same momentum that has been gain over the 18 months, well, we'll have 5.4, 5.5 million tons. Hopefully there would be no force majeure and we'll reach this number. What does it mean globally? We are reaching already closer to the needed average monthly pace of exports like we had in peaceful times. It was between 6 to 7 million tons a month, depending on the seasonality and intensity. But if we reach 6 million tons, that will be a huge achievement for everyone, all of the participants of the process. So we are moving towards this figure. Obviously, a large value of the grain initiative pays back. We have exported 3.6 million tons of food stuff, of which more than 2 million in September due to the corridor. The geography is quite broad, where we're exporting to those 159 ships went to Africa, Asia, Europe. Everybody talks about how much is shipped to Africa because, unfortunately, like in Ukraine, we hear lots of news about hardships and famine. Millions of people suffer. So 23 ships have been sent there. 640,000 tons of food. So all thanks to the grain initiative since it came into existence, and more than 100,000 tons of those on those ships was the humanitarian aid under the UN management for Ethiopia and Yemen, and 150,000 tons were announced already. So lots of international partners keep collecting funds in order to help those countries to overcome the famine that's happened because of the adverse weather conditions. So, summing up, we can see that the war brought hardships, but the agrarians managed to handle those. We had problems with diesel, but now we have enough fuel. There was another question where to store, so we found the alternatives, and no problems with spoiling foodstuff because there is no place to store it. So the important thing is to keep exports stable. Thank you. I'm ready to entertain your questions. Mr. Taras, on exports, you said that this year we collected 67,000 tons of harvest. How much of that would be sent to for exports? No, 67 million tons to begin with. The internal consumption, domestic consumption is 20 million tons, depending on cattle breeding. So at least 45 million will be exported, while 2022 would be used for internal domestic consumption, which is 1/3. Well, do we have still leftovers from last season? Yes, we had some substantial carryovers, about 20 million tons all in all. A lot of that has been exported already. We expect that about late September, early October, most of those carryovers stored in ports will be exported, and come October we'll start exporting new harvest. So storing the harvest, as you said, a huge problem. So we're discussing whether we'll be able to bring in special temporary premises. Well, yeah, we are working on this, but two aspects here. Private sector has brought those temporary arrangements themselves, and the FAO would help us to bring those facilities for storing 6.5 million. So how we will break down those temporary solutions will tell you at the end of the season, but the volume has been already identified, so we'll start handing out those storage facilities for corn, which we will start actively collecting in the season of active corn harvesting. So as soon as we get them, we'll be able to store grain in them. Valeria Dramanjir, Rada TV channel. My question to you is about the harvest at the occupied territories. Is this issue regulated in any way? Does Ukraine have the information what was the harvest there, whether it's being taken to the territory of the Russian Federation through Crimea? So what's the situation at the occupied territories? Two factors here. The source of our information are satellite images, because it's important to verify the information. When people tell us something from the temporarily occupied territories, well, that's one thing. But looking at the satellite imagery, what we see is that they haven't been planting summer crops. So the winter crops have been planted by us back in autumn last year. So they were in good shape, but a certain percentage has been burned down, destroyed. The rest harvested. So no planting of summer crops, times less than in usual years. So what we recommended, talking through our line associations, that the agrarians would not be bringing the harvested seeds to large silos where it's quite easy, unfortunately, to steal it using brute force. Instead, storing it elsewhere, including in the field. So no such facts like it was with the harvest of last year, where 20, 30, 50,000 were taken from the silos. Well, so they just stole what's already being there using guns, and that's where we shared the information that 550 to 600,000 tons stolen like this. So no similar cases now, but when people can tell us about stealings, they tell us, but at least not what happens in Kharkiv region, where the occupation allowed to preserve the harvest collected in July and August. So hopefully the armed forces will help us to disallow the Russians to steal even more. According to agronomic harvest, the winter crops should have been started planted in August, but in Kharkiv region the occupation does allow you until the 20th of October to plant, but the large territories are mined there, so it's important to demine it in time to be able to plant winter crops. Ukrinform, tell us please how much harvest has been lost at the fields where it's being already grown. We've seen how fields were burning. So do you have the assessment how much we've failed to collect? Well, if we look at the areas for winter crops, we estimated that we could have collected about 10 million tons. About 10 million tons is what was destroyed at the temporary occupied territories. Sometimes stolen, sometimes burned down, so up to 10 million tons. As to what we observed on the satellite imagery, it's about 5%. But again, that's what's being identified there. So at least 5,000 tons of potential harvest lost. So we can see what's being harvested, but it's stolen not at the silos, so only after the deoccupation we'll have more accurate figures with the real assessment of the situation on the ground. What about buckwheat, Mr. Taras? You just said that for the first time we'll get the harvest that will fully meet our internal users' needs. Will our consumers feel it in terms of price as well? Because this is the product that's whose prices keep growing. Well, they will feel the price difference, of course, because starting from harvesting all the way to the table is 1.5 to 2 months. Drying, packaging, so 2.5 to 2 months. So the harvesting will be over in October, so the outcome would be more or less clear in November, December. So the price is already high, but over the course of 1 week it's minus 5.5 hryvnias per kilo, so it will go down for sure, naturally. As soon as we'll have it in volumes, the buckwheat, the consumers will feel it. They started feeling it already. Of course, there's no sense to store it when the price is high in store, but remember, the minimum price will keep growing. The minimum price will come November, December. No deficit at that time, and you can form some reserves. Thank you for joining us here. That was Taras Vysotskyi, First Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy and Foodstuff of Ukraine. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. Our next speaker will be at noon. We'll discuss about the stabilization of the hard currency markets, the hryvnia exchange court. That was be Deputy Chairperson of the NBU board. Thank you. Stay with us.